Right, so this is a presentation for topic 5 from Econ 3. Title of this topic is Oligopoly. The previous two presentations are focused around two different market structures. Topic 3 was looking at perfect competition, and topic 4 looking at monopoly. Oligopoly falls somewhere between the two. So it's part way to being a monopoly, but there are some aspects of perfect competition which are still potentially there. Anyway, first things first, let's list some of the key characteristics of oligopoly. One of the key characteristics is that the market tends to be dominated by several large firms. So what I mean by that is you'll have maybe 3 or 4, even 5 sometimes, big firms that have got a high concentration ratio in the market. So that might mean that 3 or 4 firms have got a combined market share in the market of 80%. If you look at the UK supermarket industry, perfect example of oligopoly, dominated by 4 key supermarkets: Asda, Sainsbury's, Tesco and Morrison's. Another key characteristic: firms are price makers, and the reason for that is because of differentiated products. Now, what I mean by differentiated products is if you go into, let's say, Asda, the product range will be slightly different from that in Sainsbury's. So that means that because the product's slightly different, each firm is able to some extent set their own price levels, which might differ from some of their rivals. Other key characteristics: high barriers to entry. Firms in oligopoly, a bit like a monopoly in some respects, have built up very high barriers to entry which stop new firms setting up and competing with them. In the supermarket industry, these are things such as the brand image, the setup cost to create the stores, the economies of scale that these firms have built up in terms of cost of production or cost of accessing the goods that they want to sell. Very cheap compared to what a new startup firm will be faced with. Anyway, we've got across what an oligopoly is. What we want to do is talk about some of the examples of good and bad things about oligopoly. Before we do that though, I want to draw a diagram which can be used to explain how firms in oligopoly tend to behave. What I'm going to draw is a fictitious example, but it illustrates our point perfectly. This is something we call a kinked demand curve, and what it is used to explain is why firms in oligopoly avoid price competition. Let's imagine that originally one of our key firms in oligopoly is operating at this point here. Let's just give some numbers, we can base it on something. Let's imagine price £10, they sell 100. Now, option A, this business sells 100 units of output at £10 each. That comes to £1,000. Okay, now what our oligopoly will be thinking now is, should I change my pricing strategy? Will this generate more customers and more profit for the business? The kinked demand curve suggests no. So let's take a reason why. Okay, now on this demand curve below point A, so this really, really vertical part, this part of the demand curve is very price inelastic. And let's see what this will mean for the business. Let's imagine they decided to drop price to £5. Demand might only go up to 110. So at point B, the new revenue will be 110 times £5. My math says that is 550 quid. So we can see that by dropping price, their revenue will actually fall. Now the reason for this is because of interdependency between firms. Firms in oligopoly are very paranoid about what their key rivals might do. Now here's one problem. Let's imagine at point A, this company's thinking, right, okay, lower my prices, I can nick more customers from the rival firms. But the danger is, if this firm lowers their prices, their main rivals might do exactly the same thing, because they're worried about losing customers. So the net outcome is, this business might gain, well, as we can see here, 10 more customers. the other business that lowers their prices might gain 10 additional customers, but the impact on their revenue is that it's gone down. So they're selling more, but they're bringing less money in, so therefore they're making less profits, or maybe even potentially a loss. So let's consider why this business might not want to put up their prices. Let's imagine they decide, well, we'll charge £15 then. Demand now drops to 50. We'll do the maths and then we'll look at what's happened here. So we'll call this point C. So 15 times 50, if my maths is right, comes to £750. So again, we can see that the business is actually going to see its revenue fall. Now the reason for this is the demand curve above A, so towards C, is price elastic. Again, this word interdependency becomes important. The business, by putting up their price, might be concerned that their rivals might not do the same thing. So if their rivals don't, this business will lose customers who now go to their rivals instead. We can also explain why businesses in oligopoly avoid price competition by looking at something called game theory. It's often called the prisoner's dilemma. Now what this suggests is that businesses are better working together and setting their own pricing strategy. If they were to go head-to-head in competition, it will lead to lower and lower prices, which drives down their revenues and their profit levels. Therefore, what game theory suggests that businesses are better doing in oligopoly is colluding, so raising price together. So let's explain what we mean by this then. Now what we have is formal and informal collusion. Let's think about these 3 or 4 large firms that dominate this market. Now what these 3 or 4 large firms will be thinking is if we can work together, we dominate this marketplace. As a collective group of companies, if we were to operate together, we can gain more or less monopoly power. Because there's very little choice what customers can do apart from come to these 3 or 4 large firms. So what formal collusion could form is what we call restrictive agreements. I'll explain what this means in a second. What we might also see is minimum prices coming into effect. Now let's explain what we mean by restrictive agreements first of all. As a group of firms, what they might decide to do is try and restrict new firms competing with them. If this happens, as we said before, they can more or less gain monopoly power. Let me give an example of this. Let's imagine you have 2 different firms. Across the country, they have high market share, so they're in an oligopoly market structure. But in some areas of the country, they might have a monopoly. So let's take an example. It's not particularly accurate, but it illustrates our point perfectly. Let's imagine in Huddersfield, Tesco have got monopoly status. They're the biggest supermarket in Huddersfield. In Leeds, let's imagine we have Asda. Okay, let's imagine at the moment these 2 companies are thinking, should I move into the other business's territory? Tesco might be thinking, well, I'd like to move into Leeds. Asda might think, well, I won't mind moving into Huddersfield. Trouble now is, though, if these 2 companies decide to do this, they've now got big competition in their own markets. This will force down prices, making things better for the customer, bad for the business. So what these companies might decide to do is, well, hang on, we'll not do that. Tesco might say, we'll not come into Leeds if Asda don't come into Huddersfield. It's a restrictive agreement. They're restricting competition in the marketplace. What they might also decide to do is to have minimum prices. They might say to each other, well, if you don't charge below £1 for 4 pints of milk, we'll not do that either. That way, in effect, what they're doing is raising prices together. Okay, let's think about what informal collusion is all about. Here, things happen that's maybe not deliberate, or it's something that's maybe not designed to restrict trade. Good example is if you're the largest firm in a marketplace, in an oligopoly market structure, if you were to raise your price then all the firms will tend to follow suit. It will act as a signal to all the other firms that they can do exactly the same. So that's what we call the role of the leader. So one big firm does it, it acts as a signal to all the other firms to copy and raise their price as well. What we also have though is what we call barometric price leadership. What happens here is generally the smaller firms are the ones that are more sensitive to price changes. Customers will go elsewhere if their prices change. If these smaller businesses, generally smaller businesses anyway, were to change their price levels, then again it acts as an indicator to the big firms that they can get away with doing the same thing as well. So for example, Tesco might think if all the local corner shops are putting up their prices of milk, then we as a big company can do exactly the same thing. Last thing I want to do in Oligopoly is to look at the good and bad points about this market structure. Most of the things that we've said so far tend to lead towards bad, so let's do them things first of all. Okay, because of formal collusion, we said that the big firms can gain monopoly status. What this means is they can raise prices, lower choice, and quality for customers. What this will all mean is potentially it leads to lower economic welfare. Okay? Because of collusion, there is no price competition. So the prices are potentially quite high. But let's think about some good things of it though. Some collusion is actually a good thing. Let me give you some examples. Here's a key one: sharing factors of production and economies of scale. We know that as output increases, average costs will fall for a business. So if 2 or 3 big firms can pull their technology, their resources together, they can bring down average costs. This might make things cheaper for customers. If businesses are to share certain factors of production, this could involve airlines, for example, sharing their tankers which refuel their aeroplanes. Maybe bulk buying aeroplanes together to get the cost down. Maybe when they're investing in research and development, they work together to share the cost, which again brings down prices. Because of this, what we might see is more dynamic efficiency. High profits can be invested into improving things, but not only that, sharing all these resources might lead to a greater outcome for research and development, which again makes things better for customers. One final one I want to mention here. Businesses in oligopoly don't compete on price as much as they can help anyway, but what we do have is a lot of non-price competition. If we look at the supermarket industry, they're developing more services to make people choose them over their rivals. Home delivery services, club cards, reward schemes, they will offer internet services, a bigger range of products, developing their product range. These are all examples of things to try and get more people to shop there. More recent things include things like 24-hour shopping, just to give them a bit over their rivals. This is obviously good for the customer, but the overall decision, are they good or bad? Well, it's difficult to conclude.